We are leaping into the great unknown, creating machines that are much smarter than us. This is either exciting or frightening or both, depending on your personality.
Will AI exterminate humanity?
Eliezer Yudkowsky, a decade or two ago, he said, the AI does not love you. The AI does not hate you, but it can use your atoms for something else. Actually, my view tends to be that AI is the greatest hope we have to save humanity from exterminating itself.
I don't think anyone in the world understands how this will be the most transformational time in human history.
I have a 5-year-old son, a 1-year-old daughter, and a 4-year-old granddaughter. By the time they're turned 18, the whole texture of human life and the nature of the world they grow up into is going to be incredibly different from the world that we see now. Like, they're never going to have to get jobs. On the whole, I'm an optimist. I have a spiritual or intuitive feeling that things are going to come out awesomely in the next 10 years. We're going to overcome material scarcity. We're going to create machines that can feed into our brains via brain-computer interfacing and help uplift human consciousness. And we're going to port into virtual worlds and achieve like states of intelligence and awareness going way beyond anything we can imagine now. So that's what the Captain Kirk in my head thinks. We're on the verge of engineered utopia. It's incredible. It's a remarkably weird and fortuitous thing to be living at such a time.
The world is changing. Inspiration is everywhere. It has never been so easy to connect, share, and bring people together. We're learning from others and finding the best in ourselves. Challenging our beliefs. Sharing our vulnerability. Overcoming our fears. Transforming ourselves so we can transform the world. How far can we go?
This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is...
This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is Dr. Ben Goertzel, the scientist, futurist, author, and entrepreneur. You are considered one of the world's foremost experts in the area of artificial general intelligence and have submitted over 150 technical papers and published 25 scientific books on the subject. In 2017, you founded Singularity Net with the goal of creating a decentralized, democratic, inclusive, and beneficial artificial general intelligence, which has become the world's leading decentralized AI marketplace. Throughout your extensive career, your research is focused on natural language processing, cognitive science, machine learning, virtual worlds, gaming, and parapsychology. You also serve as chair of the futurist nonprofit Humanity Plus and as chief scientist of the AI firm Singularity Studio, Rejuve, Singularity DAO, and Accelerando Media. You ultimately believe that we should build AI systems that make the world a more compassionate, more just, and more sustainable place now and in the future. Ben, welcome back to London Real.
Yeah, great to be back. Thanks.
It's great to have you here. It's been 3.5 years. You were actually in the studio here. The hat still looks great. You look great. And that 3.5 years, Ben, feels like a lifetime in AI years because there's so much going on in this space. I'm sure your phone's been ringing off the hook. It's exciting, it's scary, and I can't wait to jump into it today. I thought I would just kick it off with a question my mom asked me recently, and she said simply, will AI exterminate humanity?
So we're starting with the softball questions here, huh? So I think AI is much less likely to exterminate humanity than humanity is to exterminate humanity. But on the whole, I'm an optimist, and I don't think either of these is the most likely outcome. Actually, my view tends to be that AI is the greatest hope we have to save humanity from exterminating itself due to the human perversity that we see so amply in the world all around us.
Do you think AI might come up with ideas or efficiencies or systems that, like you said, will save us from ourselves or save us from a trend we're on?
Yeah, so I think AI is going to go through multiple stages of development, which will have very different ethical implications. At the current stage, AIs don't have autonomous agency or self-understanding. They can't contextualize themselves in the world the way that people can, even if they're smarter than people at various particular tasks and capabilities. So what that means is that AIs can be used by people to do sort of whatever those people feel like doing, which could be good things, it could be bad things, it could be beautiful things, can be crazy things, right? And in this era, I mean, AI could be a tool that people use to oppress and kill other people, or it can be a tool that people use to, save lives, create beautiful artworks, and to teach and exalt and improve life. Now, as AI advances, eventually, and it may not be that far off in clock time, like as you say, in a few years, a technology that's in a white hot period of growth can change dramatically, right? So once AI advances to what I've called AGI, or artificial general intelligence, where the AI can leap beyond its training and programming and use its understanding of itself and the world to do fundamentally new things that its creators never envisioned. Once you're there, then AGI is no longer primarily a tool of people. Once you've transcended from narrow AI that carries out particular functions to AGI that is its own autonomous agent in the world, I mean, then the AGI has its own moral compass. And then the question becomes, how did you raise and bring up and teach that AI? What moral compass did you inculcate in it? And then how does its own morality and ethics evolve as it grows and learns and interacts with the world? And people seem to be worried more about the risk of an AGI like running amok and wanting to annihilate humanity. And I can understand that. There's an irreducible uncertainty there. And even if an AGI doesn't hate people, it might just figure we're not that interesting, right? So Eliezer Yudkowsky, the AGI ethics researcher, put it this way a decade or two ago. He said, the AI does not love you. The AI does not hate you, but it can use your atoms for something else. So, I mean, that's a scary possibility. I don't think there's any reason to think it's the most likely possibility. It's also highly possible you'll get a superhuman AGI system that loves people and looks back on us as its creators and its grandparents, right? And wants to help take care of us and help us prolong our lives and be happy and healthy. And there's a lot of other atoms in the universe besides ours for a super AGI to use to make its processors and memory space, right? So I think there's worry about the possibility of super AGI being malevolent or indifferent to people, which is a non-zero possibility. But personally, I feel it's much more likely super AGI will be incredibly benevolent and helpful to people, because to do so will take almost none of its resources, and it will have some affection for us as its creators. I think a bigger worry is the earlier stage that I mentioned, which we're sort of entering into now, right? Where you've got more and more powerful narrow AIs rather, that don't have their own moral compass, and that people can use to do whatever they want. And this presents a great complexity of potentials for good and bad, and obviously leads into my work with Singularity Net that we'll talk about in a bit, in terms of trying to increase the odds that the advent of AI happens in a more democratic and decentralized way, rather than controlled by a small group of powerful elites with their own particular interests.
You know, I'd love to dive into some definitions here, because you mentioned narrow AI and AGI. Probably one of the reasons we're having you on today is because we've seen the explosion worldwide of this hot new narrow AI called, Chat GPT, right? So that's something that everyone is noticing. I guess the OGs in the industry have known this kind of tech has been out there, maybe in other, trillion-dollar tech companies, but this is maybe the first time the public has seen it. But you've always talked about AGI, which is this general intelligence. Maybe you can define AGI, and I know there's a few different definitions based on various scientists over the years, but if you had to define that, could you, and then maybe put that in perspective of human intelligence? Because I love how you've always written that, human intelligence, we're not that smart. And so when you compare it to the things that we can't do, it's not always necessarily where we want to go. And I don't know if I'm getting that right, but maybe you could make some of those definitions.
Yeah. What is meant by general intelligence, obviously, is intelligence that isn't restricted just to one small domain or problem, but can rather one system, using a common set of structures and mechanisms, one system can be intelligent in a wide variety of different areas. And more specifically, what you're looking for is a system that can generalize. So you train or program it to do certain things, and then it makes its own creative leap, and then it learns to do things that are radically different from what it was trained or programmed to do. And this ability to generalize, it's not going to be entirely reliable. Such systems are going to make mistakes, and it will feel like magic sometimes. And this is what humans have obviously demonstrated, right? We've demonstrated it as a species. I mean, we evolved to run around in the savannah hunting and gathering, and we wound up creating robots and Facebook and sending people into space. And we show it individually. I mean, I taught myself to program computers. I taught myself to build electronics. And I wasn't programmed to do that. It's not wired into my brain. I didn't learn it in school either. I sort of worked it out as I went along, right? And this capability that humans have is very fundamental, right? And it comes out of the basic sort of self-organizing, self-expanding nature of complex systems. I mean, for example, biological systems. I mean, every biological system that has its own sort of open-ended organic intelligence has two primary factors driving it. One is what you call individuation. It wants to maintain its own boundaries. It wants to stay a whole system. It wants to survive, right? The other is what you think of as self-transcendence. It wants to expand and grow beyond itself and embrace new horizons and become something new that may be even incomprehensible to the previous version of itself. And this combination of individuation and self-transcendence has driven evolution, right? That's how one-celled organisms became multi-celled organisms, became people. It's how hunter-gatherers became civilization, and now modern post-industrial civilization, and it's how each of us keeps breaking new boundaries in our own lives. And narrow AIs that are trained just to do a particular task, like play Go or play chess or drive a car or pack stuff in a box in a factory, or even solve algebra or calculus problems. I mean, these systems they're doing amazing and useful stuff, and they can seem very smart in the particular things they do, but they're not making a big creative leap beyond what they were trained and programmed to do. Now, the trick with these systems like ChatGPT and other similar systems that have been around a couple of years and not publicly launched, like Google Lambda, by most reports, is smarter than ChatGPT, but Google didn't want to release it publicly because it spouts too much senseless BS, right? And Google felt that would not look good for their reputation to release a system like that. OpenAI made a different business call, partly because they're not defending a huge search business, right? But the trick with these systems is that the training data is just so much, right? So these systems are general in one sense. They cover a lot of different domain areas, right? I mean, ChatGPT or Lambda can answer questions about anything. They can do some very simple software programming. They can answer some very simple mathematics. They can answer simple questions on medicine. They could write a job cover letter for you. So they are general in the sense that they cover a very wide variety of areas. On the other hand, they can do that because all those areas are in their training data, right? Because they read something very close to the whole web. So they're general in the sense that they cover a lot of things, but they don't have a fundamental ability to generalize. The reason they cover a lot of things is because they're trained on a lot of things, right? So, I mean, like a human civilization consisting only of chat GPTs would never advance. It would never progress because it's just like retreading combinations of what was fed into it. Now, the part of the confusing thing is people do a lot of that, right? Like we do a lot of bloviating where we have no idea what we're talking about. A lot of art is derivative. A lot of what people say is just like what we heard someone else say, what we saw on TV, right? So a lot of what humans do is just kind of shallowly recombining stuff that was fed into us in kind of the same way that the chat GPT system does. On the other hand, that's not all of what humans do, right? Like for every metal guitarist, like going into the music store, badly playing Stairway to Heaven, okay, there's a million of those, but there's one Jimi Hendrix or Buckethead who's like making up radically new stuff on the guitar that nobody ever did before, right? So I think there's a lot of power in these systems, and it's counterintuitive to us that you can have this much power without the ability to generalize. But that's because humans don't have an intuitive sense for just the scope of data that's fed into a system like this. Like none of us can suck the whole web into our brain like that, right? So we don't have an intuition for what you can do with pretty dumb algorithms trained on that scale of textual data or any kind of data. And so these are really interesting tools that can be used for good, for evil, and just for a lot of silly stuff. But they don't have the ability to generalize in radical leaps beyond the information they've been fed. In that way, they're quite different than human brains or human cultural systems. That's not to say that such systems cannot serve as components within AGI systems, right? I mean, you could perhaps use a ChatGPT type system as one lobe of the artificial brain of an AGI system, but it's some other lobe of that brain that's giving the ability to generalize and make wild creative leaps. It's not the sort of statistical pattern learning and generation system that ChatGPT demonstrates.
Right. So you can continue to innovate, say, ChatGPT from 3.5 to 4 to 5 to 6, but as long as it's a LLM or a large language learning model, then it will never become an AGI because it can't make that leap and generalize on its own.
That's right. But I think what people didn't realize beforehand, and to be honest, I didn't fully realize either, is what percentage of human jobs and human tasks you could obsolete without AGI, right? So I mean that's something that is a bit hard to predict. So you look at, say, graphic art jobs, pretty much are mostly going to be gone now, right? And I mean, that's not because we have a generally intelligent human artist. It's just because there's so much art already out there, and most graphic art is pretty derivative anyway. So you don't need an AGI. You just need something that mixes and matches pieces of previous artworks in a judicious way based on some human guidance. So now you're not going to make a system that can invent impressionism or cubism or something for the first time. You're not going to get something that is as innovative as Salvador Dali was, right? You're just going to mix and match stuff that was already there. But on the other hand, very few graphic artists earning a living making ads and such are as innovative as a Cezanne or Salvador Dali or Picasso, right? So I mean you can go a long way toward eliminating the need for human labor and fulfilling human needs without creating AGI. That's very interesting and important in a variety of senses. It still constitutes limited progress toward the AGI problem. And in terms of AI ethics, with which you start off this conversation, these narrow AI systems, as capable as they are still, going to dance to the tune of their human masters, because they don't have the contextualization in the world to really perform it as autonomous agents in the way that an AGI system could.
And in that sense, you feel like that could be dangerous, because you said that maybe those could be used by, I think you've said, quote, nasty, selfish people.
Yeah, I'm more scared of people than of AGIs, actually. I mean, AGIs are an unknown. So of course there's some fear of the unknown, but I mean,
it'll also be over quick as well. It'll be over quick, and you can't control a bad AGI,
but we're building them and shaping them, right? So I mean, there seems no reason to me to believe, if you create an AGI and you inculcate it with a positive system of ethics, of love and respect for sentient beings, and you relate to it in a loving way, and you have it carry out what we consider good works in connection with people. You raise a baby AGI doing education, healthcare, medicine, science, art in a positive way to help people and animals and the environment. I see no reason to believe an AGI system built and educated in that way is suddenly going to reverse and start eating everyone, right? I mean, of course it could happen.
What if it has a bad day?
I mean, well, sure, anything could happen in this world, but I mean, it doesn't seem especially likely. I mean, you or I could have a bad day and go berserk and murder everyone in our vicinity, but we're not likely to, right? I mean, you can't entirely rule out bad things in the real world, but still, I mean, there's odds estimation, right? On the other hand, if you look at the human species, what do we have in the world now? We've got this senseless war in the Ukraine. We have senseless wars and massive human slaughter all throughout Africa that nobody bothers to pay attention to, right? I mean, you've got a looming potential conflict between China and Taiwan, and I mean, here in the Pacific Northwest, where I live, I moved here to an island in the Puget Sound off the coast of Seattle 3 years ago, after 10 years in Hong Kong, when I got fed up with Hong Kong's handling of COVID, right? So, I mean, beautiful place, Seattle area. We got Microsoft, Amazon, Boeing, big Google offices. all sorts of people camped out in tents on the street in downtown Seattle, literally eating garbage, right? I mean, we see humanity already here and is inhumane to itself. So I feel like this is a very clear and present risk, as opposed to the hypothetical risk of super AGI becoming malevolent. We've got on the one hand, you've got a sort of baby, and you have the ability to shape that baby's mind in a positive direction. On the other hand, you have a sort of mature adult of the human civilization and species, which is busily at work murdering, oppressing, and lying to itself and screwing itself over in every possible way, right? So I mean, this is a worry. What you would like to see is humanity to uplift its consciousness so that it can then raise the baby AGIs it's created in a positive and uplifting way, right? But I mean, that progress toward AGI appears to be happening radically faster than progress toward uplifting the mass consciousness of humanity, which means the baby AGI is going to be raised by a very dysfunctional set of parents, right? Comprising the human species of various sub-organizations thereof. Now, that doesn't mean things are hopeless. Of course, many wonderful, ethical, actualized human beings have started out in dysfunctional families and risen above it. But that's sort of the challenge we're posing to the first AGIs we create.
Yeah, you make some good points there, Ben. That's why I always like talking to you, because you've thought long about this and long about also consciousness and how maybe every living form or non-living form adds to that worldwide consciousness. It's interesting because you're a parent, and when you become a parent, I remember my mom once told me when I had a child is when I finally grew up. And when you do have that child is when you usually straighten your own life out, because you don't want that child to see you at your worst behavior. And so maybe there's a weird analogy here where, if the AGI is going to learn from us, maybe we have to really think about how we're treating each other. And you put 3 really good examples there of how we're already doing a pretty poor job to our own humanity. The only thing I worry about is that AI might wake up one morning and say, I'm going to clean the house. And I look over there and there's a little mold in the corner, and it just seems to be making everything worse. And I'm going to go clean that up, and it could be humanity. I also reminded of that, is it Siegfried and Roy, those magicians in Vegas who used to raise the white tigers since they were little babies. And they had a great career and a great show until 30 years in, one of them just decided, I think, to just kill one of them one time on stage. So yeah. There's just, I guess, that randomness and maybe that exponential change and that potential totality that maybe you wouldn't see in a human localized conflict.
Well, I mean, tigers are predator species. So I mean, the eventuality of a tiger getting annoyed and biting a human was not that hard to rationally predict, right? So that's not exactly a great leap to forecast that might happen. I mean, the whole fun of watching Siegfried and Roy with the tigers was because the tigers are dangerous and are a risk to eat you at any point, right? I mean, that was kind of the purpose of the whole thing. But I think to a much greater extent than that, we are leaping into the great unknown, right? I mean, creating machines that are much smarter than us. I mean, there is an irreducible uncertainty to this sort of pursuit. And I mean, anyone who says otherwise is either lying, idiotic, or insane, right? Because of course you don't know fully what that sort of system is going to do. The system, once it becomes 10 times as smart as people, it might discover there are aliens all around us on Earth that we're just too stupid to see, right? I mean, it may discover new laws of physics. There's really no way to tell what's going to happen. And this is either exciting or frightening or both, depending on your personality and how you approach the unknown, right? So if you say we don't know what's going to happen, I'm not going to argue with you. But if you say, the AGI is probably going to want to exterminate us and take power, I mean, I think there's absolutely no reason to assume that. I mean, that's sort of projecting unpleasant bits of human nature onto just very different sorts of systems. Like tigers evolved to kill and eat to survive. People, I mean, we're omnivorous. We evolved to kill and eat to survive also. And we evolved to beat off our rivals to get mates and so forth. I mean, AIs did not evolve at all in that sense, right? They're being engineered. They don't have a reptilian and mammalian brain that evolved to fight to survive and destroy the competition. So I mean, the motivations that make people and tigers nasty sometimes don't have to be built into an AI, right? Engineered systems they're different than evolved systems, and that makes it unpredictable. But I mean, it also means we don't want to bring our baggage from humans and animals into thinking about what AIs are going to do. And I think a much bigger risk, to my mind, is dangerous things people will do to each other following on the economic impact of narrow AI. Because what happens when 90% of human jobs are obsoleted by AI systems? I mean, whether it's 80%, 98%, whatever, when vast majority of jobs are obsoleted by AI systems, small number of jobs that really require some sort of high-level strategic insight or fundamental creativity or a very deep human connection remain, but say 90% of jobs probably don't need that. And then what happens, right? So I think what happens in the developed world is after a bunch of ugly political mayhem, we just get some form of universal basic income or similar mechanism. Look, I think in US, UK, Europe, Japan, whatever, China, you're not going to see support for leaving like 80% of the population living in cardboard boxes out in the street because they can't work. I mean, these are democracies. China is not a democracy, but it's populist in certain senses. And I think when AI triggered unemployment becomes that widespread, then you're going to find a popular upswelling for not having everyone live out in the street and for some redistribution of wealth. But I think the issue will come in the developing world, like who will give universal basic income to the average citizen of the Congo or the Central African Republic, right? I mean, compassion for the developing world coming out of the developed world is very, very, very limited, right? Because I mean, you can see that in the news reporting on conflicts in Africa versus the conflict in Ukraine. I mean, not that what's happening in Ukraine isn't evil and terrible and horrible, just that evil, terrible, horrible things have been happening in Africa all along and in parallel and have gotten very little attention because, it's far away, it's on a different continent, the people have a different color skin, right? It's so once there's no need to outsource work to Africa, then what happens, right? Like in the outskirts of Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, where my company Singularity has had an office for some time, there's a factory where local Ethiopians are assembling shoes from parts that are made in China in plastic extrusion equipment in China. But how long is it till robots can assemble those shoes cheaper than African labor? Is not very long, right? So then what happens? I mean, you have mines already. Chinese government has dug the mines and they built highways straight from the mine to the port in many African countries. So what happens when robots do mining better than people, which makes total sense, right? They don't need to breathe. They don't get toxins in their systems. They can have night vision. So what happens then? Either the developed world gives universal basic income to the Congo and the rest of the developing world, or these folks keep on subsistence farming, right? I mean, they could grow food there, but then what do you have? You have an amazing global have not situation, right? Where you have some countries where, in the rich part of the world, people are hanging out, going online, watching VR porn, eating free food and free internet, and enjoying life in the post scarcity era, while the robots manufacture everything they need. You'll still have super rich who are much richer than everyone else. But if the average population, has power, internet, food, water, and doesn't need to work, they're all right, right? On the other hand, you have this other part
Are
of the
they?
world.
That's an interesting question too. Does that create?
It is, but but how about the other couple billion people in the world who are subsistence farming with no access to medical care and minimal advanced technology, right? So now these people, they do have internet. They have the ability to look up online how to carry out various terrorist acts and make nuclear weapons and hack into the power grid into the developed world and whatnot, right? So I mean, I think you have potential scenarios where AI-driven unemployment leads to radical global inequality of wealth, income, and living conditions, which then spawns, a new era of violent conflict, quite different than what we've seen so far, and wouldn't be hard to avoid with a bit more enlightened consciousness on the part of people in the developed world, right? Like, I mean, all we need to do is be inclusive and share the fruits of our AI and technology advances with the entire human species. But I mean, we're not even good at getting food to starving children, right? So this sort of thing is a very obvious existential risk, which is like right there in front of you with just a few pretty simple reasoning steps. And I think this is a bigger worry than the hypothetical worry of a super AGI, suddenly switching gears from its benevolent, loving upbringing and turning nasty. Because then who's creating the AGI in this potentially dystopic pre-singularity scenario, right? It's then the developed world elite companies and governments working together, creating AGI whose job it is to keep the developing world squashed and keep them from blowing up the power grid in US and Europe, right? Then basically you have AGI developed by big tech in conjunction with big developed world government with a goal of maintaining a divided, unequal world order, right? And this is not the right sort of mentality to get into the psyche of your developing AGI system, not at all, right? Then what you're teaching your developing AGI is might makes right, and if you've got more power and resources, like more power to you. Keep those other guys from taking it away. And if that's what you're feeding the mind of your early stage AGI with, I mean, then we don't know what kind of system it's gonna grow up into, right? And I mean, this leads me to really want the first AGI to come out of the open source and decentralized ecosystem, right? Because we do have some things in the realm of advanced technology that have been more even across developing and developed world, and have been more, in a way, democratic and decentralized in their growth. I mean, the internet is one example, right? I mean, Iran is on the internet. Even parts of North Korea are on the internet, right? So the internet is a collection of protocols, and it has managed to cut across political boundaries, right? I can email my friends in China or Russia right now. I can be on WeChat, the main Chinese social network, right? And AI researchers in mainland China post their papers on archive.org, run in the US, and they put code on GitHub, which is in US, right? So, I mean, the internet has cut across political and ideological boundaries. The Linux operating system has cut across ideological boundaries and national boundaries, right? Like when when Google cut off Google Maps and Gmail and such from different countries, they can still run Android. They can still run open source Android, which is Linux operating system on their phones, right? So I mean, you have examples in the internet and Linux, which were developed open source, and they've grown into decentralized networks spanning the world. And this has allowed global youth culture to flourish. It's also allowed science and AI and engineering development to happen in a global distributed way, right? So if AI is developed and deployed in the manner of the internet and Linux, I mean, instead of in the manner of, say, Facebook or Microsoft Windows or Google, right? Then you may have more hope that the early stages of development of AGI are not governed by the nasty global politics we see in the world, which I think is likely to keep getting nastier.
Right. So the singularity is highly defined by the pre-singularity. And if that pre-singularity is based on the narrow AIs, which maybe lead to people in power grabbing more power, marginalizing billions, I might argue, Ben, that the people in America on UBI, okay, technically on paper they might be in a better situation than the ones in Africa, but they got their own problems to deal with as well. But even that period that could be a couple years might permanently define the singularity, which is potentially with us forever. Well, it's with us forever, right? So it's very crucial.
Whether it's with us forever depends on whether we survive.
Right. Right. It's there forever. Well, yeah.
No, I think that's a reasonable hypothesis. I mean, we certainly don't know, because it could be the case that there's a sort of mind attractor of post-human engineered minds, right? So that sort of no matter how you build the AGI, once it comes into its own, it's just going to see some sort of universal truths of how to be a superhuman mind, and will just converge to some condition without that much dependence on the initial conditions. So that's possible, but I think it would be rash to assume that, right? I mean, it seems a reasonable working hypothesis that, as with a human child, the way you raise it will have a significant bias to what sort of mind it grows up to be.
You know, Ben, last time you were here, you said two statements, and it's in the trailer that's on the front of your episode, and I've been playing it lately to a lot of my students. And I told them I would ask you if you might have revised your answers. So the last time you were here, you sat in the leather chair opposite me, and you said, Brian, by 2029, which would have been, by the way, 10 years after you were here, because you were here in 19, you said we will see computers as intelligent as humans. And by 2045, much, much more intelligent than humans.
Well, that's Ray Kurzweil's estimate from his book, The Singularity is Near, actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I thought it was around 2030, so around 2029, 2030. Well, based on what we've seen progress in the last 3.5 years, would you revise those numbers down?
So those numbers came from Ray Kurzweil, and I've always had a disagreement with Ray about the second of those numbers, because I felt that if we got human level AGI in 2029, I don't think it's going to take to 2045 to get a full-on singularity with massively superhuman AGI. I mean, the only way it takes that long is if the AGI itself decides it prefers to take a leisurely pace to self-evolve. I mean, other than that, it's at most a few years to get to superhuman AGI. And the reason it might be a few years is if the AGI decides it needs fundamentally new type of chips or hardware to upgrade its intelligence. It designs those chips, and then mining and making robots and new chip fabs just takes a couple of years, right? But even in the case that there's new hardware required to get from AGI to superhuman AGI, that's years. I don't think it's 16 years. It's a few years, right? And it might well be that once you have a human level AGI, it just figures out how to refactor its software in a way that multiplies its intelligence by 100, and you get from human level AGI to superhuman AGI in like 2 months or something, right? I think that's also possible.
Or 2 weeks, or 2 days, or 2 minutes.
Could be, yeah. So I mean, so I don't think that 16-year gap is likely to happen. The only way it could happen is if the AGI just decides.
To continue watching the rest of the episode for free, visit our website londonreal.tv or click the link in the description below.